productivity, winning strategies, and aligning employer-employee goals. If this sounds like something your business could use more of, then you've come to the right place. The Business Mechanic Show with your host, Vaughn Sigmund. Let Vaughn show you how to develop, improve, and jumpstart your business. So now, please welcome the host of The Business Mechanic, Vaughn Sigmund.
Welcome to the Business Mechanic Show. This is your host, Vaughn Sigmund. I am joined today once again with my compatriots in crime, John Karwalke and Eric Van Doren. Say hello, gentlemen.
Hey, folks. Welcome.
Aloha.
All right. So let's just jump right into today's topic, which is authentic leadership. We were just before this podcast actually preparing a little bit, which that's something we rarely do, but we're actually preparing for this one. So probably going to be the worst podcast you ever listened to. But let's talk about it's an article I put out this past week on authenticity and leadership. And all of this comes from our experience. It comes from our real life. This isn't something we read out of a John Maxwell book and spew back to you. This is us being out there on the front lines, in the trenches, making the mistakes, learning from those mistakes, watching some of the best and some of the worst in the business and different businesses. I've worked with over 80 companies now. We're currently engaged with dozens, and we see all kinds of levels of leadership. But there's one point that we're all three very passionate about, is that authenticity of leadership. If there's 5 or 6 different leadership styles that I've written about in the past, there's 3 main ones. But this, if we bore it down to its core, what really makes a leader highly effective is their authenticity. That's truly what I believe. And Eric, you believe the same thing. We talked about this.
Paramount. Yep.
Just be yourself and don't try to fake it. Don't try to be someone you're not. And so let's just get right into that part, that self-awareness. John, you and I were talking about this a little while ago. Self-awareness. When I say being authentic, and bullet point 1 is self-awareness, what does that mean to you, John?
Honestly, I think that you really want to be aware of what your behaviors are and cognizant of how you interface with other people. And I think the single best way to do that is to take a DISC assessment so that you understand how you best communicate, how other people communicate. And again, you can start to work on enhancing the strengths that you have and mitigating the opportunities that you have, things that you're not great at. And I think that understanding that to begin with and understanding your audience is really important. And I know it's something that we offer for free. So if anybody, our listeners are out there, take a look in the show notes, I believe, and you can get a copy of a DISC assessment. Eric or I will review it with you, and that's free of charge. Okay, so we do that. But again, I think it really starts with understanding that and knowing yourself before you go out there and interact with people. Because if you want to your point, if you want to be good or just okay, that's one thing. But if you want to be great, you got to start by knowing yourself and then know your people.
And don't try to be anything other than yourself. And,
No,
Eric, have you ever worked with one of those fools that tried to be something that they were not?
Yeah, the fool was probably me when I was an emerging manager. I think we all did that when we found somebody that we said, hey, I want to be like that person. I want to be like Michael Jordan, or I want to be like this person. And I think you emulate, right? It's natural to do those things. And you get caught up into those pieces where you're trying to be like somebody that you're not. Because they either talk really well, or they know a bunch of stuff of facts, and you're trying to emulate, trying to find your own style. The pure fact is you'll find out eventually that doesn't work. It comes back to you. Yes, you can take pieces of that and make them into your own place to be authentic. But I think the pure fact is you got to be you. You got to be you. It took me a few times. I know one of my jobs I did that, and learning how to do on the road and all that kind of stuff. You're emulating your bosses, and eventually you're saying to yourself, that's not me. I got to do something else. I got to be me. and that allows people to actually connect with you. And I think being authentic, allows people, you open it up to be connected.
Well, connected and trustworthy. And when you
Yeah.
try to be an expert on something that you're not, or being knowledgeable on something you're really not, which is in psychology, it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And there's many people out there who are trying to fake their intellectual knowledge on something because they read a Twitter post and have formed a narrative in their head, but they can't defend it. They don't know enough about it. And when called on, this is where leaders, managers have to be really careful trying to emulate somebody else who may have a deep knowledge in something, and going at it with just a surface knowledge, you're going to get yourself tripped up. And then the self-awareness is, how do you react when you get caught? Right? John, I see you've got something you want to.
I was going to say, happy Patriots Day to my friends up here in New England. And I want to say that something close to home. Okay. So we've all heard of a team called the Patriots. Okay. Everybody in New England loves, everybody out of New England hates, but there's a coach up here named Bill Belichick, who's arguably the most successful coach of all time in the NFL. And how many people have left his organization to coach other places and tried to be him? Eric Mangini, Romeo Crennel, Bill O'Brien, Matt Patricia, okay, up in Detroit, and Joe Judge in New York. They all failed because they weren't authentic leaders. They tried to be Bill Belichick. They tried to act like him in press conferences and act like him with the players. It didn't work, and people could see right through it. And again, to your point, Eric, people got to be themselves. You got to be authentic to who you are. You can't try to be that other boss because it isn't going to fly, and people will see right through you. It's so evident. And there's some great like 5 examples of people trying to be that one coach who couldn't pull it off.
And the people who matter the most, which were the players, were the players in their cases, they saw right through it. They didn't have a conviction around who they were. And again, we're trying to emulate somebody else's style rather than having their own style. And there's part of this audience in other countries. Hey, by the way, we're number 15 in Australia now.
Nice.
Pretty impressed. Way to go, Eric. But so they can't relate to the New England Patriots, I don't think, deeply, but it comes down to this, just trying to be a person that you would like to be, but you haven't been aware enough to know what elements you could be and what elements you're going to come up short. And when you would, and just being humble enough to know what you're not, or, recognize that and bring in an assistant coach or fill it in with somebody else that fills in that gap. Again, I've seen many very healthy leaders, successful leaders say, yeah, I can't do that. Strategy is not my thing. That's what I brought this guy in for. Right. Or sales, I have no idea. I love sales. I don't know how to get any. I brought a sales guy in to do this for me. And it's just, you don't know what you don't know. And there's some things back to the disc profile, you're never going to be any good at. So don't try to be, because you're just going to trip over yourself, and everybody's going to look at you, and you'll never know. Everybody's going to look at you. They're going to write you down. They're going to mark you down. They're going to reduce their level of respect for you. They're going to talk behind your back. They're not going to have that trust in you because you're a gigantic BSer. And boy, you'll never know, because nobody ever comes and tells you.
Because it takes years and years of building trust in your identity. And as soon as you don't do something that's supposed to be done, you lose that trust. Right? You have to be you. I say that 1,000 times, but you just have to.
So that's hard. I was talking to a guy the other day, and he really summed this up really well for me. He says, you need to own a mirror that really reflects you. You can go get a mirror that makes you look like an underwear model, or you can get one that makes you look like a clown. You don't really want that one,
Yeah.
but you unintentionally sometimes make yourself look like a clown.
Mhm.
But you've got to be able to see that in the mirror and avoid being that guy that is not showing up in that mirror. And it's a weakness. And
It
I was
is.
trying to look for a better word than weakness, but it's just an absolute weakness. We just say what it is. And it's a self-esteem weakness. And let me tell you, once you break free of that, you free yourself of trying to protect yourself and just say, here's who I am. You more or less come out as, I'm weak at this.
Mhm.
Embrace the world.
Mhm.
The relief and the confidence it gives you, and that, okay, it's out there. Everybody knew it. Everybody already knew it. Let's just admit it and move on. It's, if somebody, listen, we all ran big businesses. Somebody would come to me in the big complex businesses I ran, and they say, I've got a problem with this. How do I fix it? I don't know. Let's go find the subject matter expert that does know.
Mhm.
And by the way, I want to join you on that so I can learn a little bit about it. There's nothing wrong with not knowing
Mhm.
what others might have. Why waste your time and that emotional bank account that you're going to waste money on?
Yeah,
But
people.
but that really involves you making yourself a little bit vulnerable by admitting that you don't know it all. And that's okay, because people want someone who's going to be open and honest with them and not pretend to always be the smartest guy, or not to pretend to be the subject matter expert when they don't know what they're talking about. Because again, people see right through you. And whether it's your colleagues at work, your people that work for you, or your customers, they'll figure it out pretty darn quick too. That if you're BSing them, you don't know what you're talking about. You've lost, Eric, to use your word, you've lost that trust. You ever eroded that, you're never going to get it back, or it'd be very hard to earn it back if you choose to go that route.
Yeah.
But again, being authentic, being vulnerable when you don't know, and that makes, honestly, that makes you a better leader from the standpoint of, it's hard to learn if you don't admit that you don't know it all. If you know all the answers already, you're not going to open up and learn new things and ask people for, to your point, that subject matter expert law, and you're going to learn a little bit about that subject.
And on the side of as the side of the employees, I think there's a gravitational pull for people that are, we use the word honest, but it's certainly not the word. It's really being authentic. It's, you want to be around people that are being themselves and being open.
And listen, I know and listen, we all three did it at one point in our career. So there's sin in all of us, but they respect, you're trying to protect the respect they have for you. You feel you put this own pressure on yourself that you have to know everything or be great at everything. And you just don't. They're going to respect you. Your people, your peers, your boss is going to respect you so much more if you're just honest with yourself. The person in the mirror is really who you are. Don't try to be anything else. But there's nothing wrong with having a shortcoming in knowledge and going getting yourself educated on it. My God, I've got a whole podcast I can tell you about the things that I realized I was crappy at, but I applied myself, invested myself in reading and training and learning and practicing to get better at it. And that, I think that kind of qualifies three of us, because I know all three of us have done that, qualifies us to do what we do, because we have walked in your shoes. We know what you feel if you're somebody that's struggling with self-awareness and trying to be something that you're not. There was another topic we talked about, is relational transparency. And that takes on so many different importances. And there was a guy that we started talking about, and I completely, because John and I work for the same guy, we completely related instantly around this topic, because John, he lived in a tomb, right? You knew nothing about the guy.
Yeah, worked with him for 16 years and very close to me, was my boss. And I never really learned anything beyond the work life persona. It's funny because all of us being authentic is about having a singular version of you. So traditionally in corporate world, we've always had a separate persona for life, for work life, and a separate persona for personal life. And it's like the two never met. They were never allowed to meet. It's funny. I was watching a show. Can I put a plug in for a TV show?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. There's a show that I'm a big fan of, and I think many of our listeners probably watch it too. It's on Apple TV. It's called Severance. And the whole premise of the show is that your memories are severed by using this mind wipe technology when you leave work. So what happens at work, there's a work version of you and a personal version of you, and the two never meet up. So when you show up at work, you only remember stuff that happens there. And as soon as you get in the elevator to leave the building, you become your personal self and you don't remember. In all of your work memories, okay, you don't remember any of that stuff. So that's traditionally how we've approached work. And that work-life balance is that you don't bring your work home with you. You don't bring your personal life to work with you. So you have these two versions of Vaughn. You have Vaughn A and you have Vaughn B. And really being authentic is having only one version of yourself. And it's a single version of you that you need to be wherever you are. So this one person in particular, this one supervisor, I know the work person, but I have no clue who the personal person is. And I think there's a lot of, again, I have a lot of great things, memories of that person that did some really great things for me. But by the same token, I think we did good at work. We probably could have done great at work had we opened up and been a little bit more honest with one another. But again, I think a lot of us walk around in those two different versions of ourselves, or at least I know in the past, that's really been the norm. And I think that's beginning to change a little bit. But by the same token, if there are two versions of you, I'll tell you another funny story. My daughter and her husband, they work at home. So the moment one of them picks up the phone, they can instantly tell if it's a work call or if it's a regular call. Because you have this work voice and mannerisms, and then you have a personal voice and mannerisms, but we all bring that with us. So whether it's our dress code, our body language, how our eye contact is different, the way we present ourselves, all of that, you need to be cognizant of all of that. And again, it shouldn't matter where you are. Again, you're going to want to read your audience in the people you're around, because again, you might be a little bit different versus you need to read the room, but we've got to be ourselves. Eric, you said it, and Vaughn, you said it, just one version of Eric, one version of John, one version of Vaughn, if we really want to truly be authentic. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. And I think that was worth maybe 6.5 cents, but it's hard to build a relationship. You have to have some level of connection with your boss in order to feel fully connected, because again, people work for people, they don't work for companies. And when there's a missing element of that connection or that relationship, you don't want to cross the line. We've talked about that before. We're not going to happy hour and getting crap faced and Drunker and Cooter Brown together. But it's okay to know some of your guilty pleasures. It's okay to know a little bit about your hobbies. It's okay to know that what maybe some of their interests your wife has. You don't want to bring the fights that you had with your significant other to work. You don't want to come in and throw your briefcase across the floor because you had a breakup before you came in. Certainly you want to keep that at the front door of the building, but for them to know a little bit more about you makes you human. Just makes you human. We relate well to other humans. But again, there's that fine line you have to be cognizant of and be careful of. Eric, what are your thoughts on this relational transparency?
The more I thought about this, the changing times, we were all forced into this. I know John and I talked about this, either it was this morning or last week, with COVID and the changing of the personal side of things, how it opened up in our work. People saw our background and saw, hey, look at the surfboard. Did you surf? Yeah, absolutely. I surfed. Hey, did you do this? Yeah, absolutely. I have the little trophies, or behind John is a guitar. I didn't know you played guitar, John. So it opened up life
A little bit.
as it did with our managers, with DMs, even DMs, because we were always in that, I guess, to your point, John, that you made is like there's two different lives. Yeah, we were real people and we had conversations about kids and stuff, but it never really went that deep. When this opened up the umbrella, I think obviously it's almost a game changer.
Mhm.
Like life has changed now. You can do Zooms at home, you go to work at home, you have conversations on the phone, it becomes one and one. I guess you become that one person. And I think with disc profile, going through this and learning about it over the last 8 months, 6, 7, 8 months, the adapted piece to it compared to the natural piece of it. To me, when I did mine, I looked at it, I go, whew, mine was pretty matchy. It's like, okay, cool. I am who I am in my natural self as well as my adapted self. And to me, that was, it felt good. I am who I am.
Well, and it's so important to understand how you adapt under pressure at work.
Mm.
And when you get, please take the assessment, 15 minutes, learn about yourself, learn about others, learn how you behave. And at adapted versus natural, which is a little confusing. That's why you need Eric or John to go through this report with you. It's really crucial and it's completely free. But if you're adapting a lot at work, that is going to be very tiresome and stressful to you. Why? Why are you having to adapt so much at work? What is the root cause of that? And what can I do about it? And unless you have a consultation with somebody that actually knows what they're talking about, you can read it and you say, oh, that's really interesting. You put it in a drawer and you move on. That is not worth anything to you. It's like going to a palm reader. So finding out how you can take information like that, turn that into some kind of action or knowledge or awareness, as we've talked about so much today. Mm-hmm. But another thing is as you were saying, it popped into my mind, Eric, this whole big shift away, and it's coming back in a big way, but to remote work and Zoom calls and that sort of thing. But that removed this whole big element of being in person with somebody, which means that you have to find another way to build relationships that aren't sitting in the same room. You can't go to lunch with somebody. You're not sitting in the break room. You're not having a cup of coffee. You're not sitting in somebody's office shooting the breeze with them or having a collaborative discussion with something in person. And that removes a very human element that has created a lot of stress for people. So if you don't take that into account, if you're a manager, a leader, a business owner that's having to now manage more and more people remotely, which a lot of companies have, I can hire people all over the country now to work for me. I don't have to have a bunch of people here paying twice the fees in California to work for me. Now I've broadened my hiring pool to people all across the globe, which is awesome, but they've got to work for you. And if you haven't done something in the way of an exercise or an approach to build this relationship and for them to understand who you are outside of just this two-dimensional Zoom call, making some emotional connection with them, you're really setting yourself way behind, and you're going to create a bunch of turnover. There's a lack of commitment, a lack of engagement, a lack of retention. And it's okay to have guilty pleasures. My God, I've got my guilty pleasures, which some people giggle at, but I love cop videos. I always have. I've wanted to be a cop and I've said this on other podcasts, since I was a little boy. I had an uncle who was a highway patrolman. I thought he was the coolest cat ever. I loved him putting on his gun. I loved listening to the police radio. When cops came out in the 80s, man, I've not missed a single cop show.
What you gonna do?
Yeah, when they come for
you.
Yeah. Who doesn't know that song?
Sonny Crockett.
It's I love that show too. But I waste 6 hours, not quite 6 hours every weekend. It's not waste. It's my guilty pleasure watching On Patrol Live. Watching cops do their work is my guilty pleasure. And anybody that knows me knows that. I just revealed it to 140,000 people today. I love that stuff. And my wife wonders why I'm so violent. No, I'm just kidding. I'm telling her, show me your hands, show me your hands. No, I'm not like that, but maybe. No, I'm just kidding. But I have fun. That's relaxing to me, but it's also my hobby. Then I go down to the gun range and blow off my steam. But it's okay to have those. What's your guilty pleasure, Eric Van Doren?
Lots of guilty pleasures, but the one I probably get to blow the most steam off is two things. It's both the same sport as golf. I love to do two things. I love to walk around Goat Hill Goat Hill Park up there in Oceanside, just very short distance from Carlsbad, where I walk and do 18 holes, and I really enjoy it. It's a hilly course, huge exercise. You carry your light bag and you try to your best, right? That's what you do. And then afterwards, let's say it's on a weekend when I'm not working. Not really, I'm always working. But when I get a chance to watch some of the greatest golfers in the world, like PGA, like the Masters, I just get immersed in that information and stats and watching the players hit the ball. Because truly, if you see them live, it is miraculous to see how good they are. It is one of those things. It's a wow factor.
You got to appreciate the game to be able to appreciate watching it live, as you do with almost any sport. But you have to play it to understand how freaking good these guys are. You look at it, and boy, we're turning this into a golf podcast. There's maybe only 10 to 15 swings per round between you and that pro, but that 15 swings or putts it's like the Grand Canyon.
It is.
Between their ability and your ability. It's such a small number, but my God, the skill set could be the same thing in leadership. You see that? I just brought it back to leadership.
Good job.
Thank you. That's welcome. Right. It's all comes back.
Yeah, you may look at something and look how easy it is, but generally, and that's why you need training. That's why you're listening to this podcast. That's the reason why you need a coach. And just like these professional players have, is to help you hone your game, get a little better, get a little better, get a little better. And it's hard to do that all by yourself.
Yeah. Go
ahead. What were you going to say?
The margin in golf is so small. They have player coaches, they have mind coaches, they have body physicists, they have 4 or 5 different things to do one thing.
Psychologists.
And let's remember, they're the best in the world, and they have all these coaches. How you ever becoming better if you don't have a coach or some trainer or somebody helping you along the way? It's invaluable to you. And to that point, in the blog that I put out this week, so I'm going to put it in our podcast this week, I'll put the link in the show notes right below the free disc assessment, is your opportunity to start joining John and Eric for weekly office hours. What is that? It's going to be an open 1-hour discussion. Anybody can sign up and join to come in, talk about your challenges, talk about a particular issue at work, talk about your boss, talk about an employee, talk about a situation that you have. And you've got an expert there helping you think your way through it. They're not going to give you the answers. That's not what a coach does. You generally will have the answers. You just have to have an expert to bring it out of you. And if you don't have the answer, if it's a tactical question, we'll be able to provide that for you too. So please don't miss that opportunity to join 2 former, very important executives that will offer an hour of time with you. And some of your peers, anybody wants to join, we're going to cut it off at 10 people per office hours. So first come, first serve. And generally that will sell out. I did this a few years ago and it sold out every single time. It's time to kick it back in again. That's our way of giving back to the leadership and the management community out there to help you out. We're here to help. There's no embarrassment, zero embarrassment, talking about transparency. There's zero embarrassment in you not knowing how to handle a difficult situation or a situation at all. So come get the free advice, join it, try it. It won't cost you a damn thing other than some time. And I guarantee that once you get into it, it'll become another resource for your learning and growing. It will provide you the knowledge, skills, and tools you need, along with the expert guidance of two very wise gentlemen. So click on the link, sign up for it. We'll send you the schedule. You can sign up for the one that works for you and take advantage of it. So back on to relationship.
Yeah, let's connect.
Yeah, let's get back to that. We've talked about vulnerability. We've talked about being your own person. We've talked about people knowing a little bit about you. John plays guitar. You can see, if you're watching the video, all the states that he's lived in. Eric, I've told you about my shameless plug on Patrol Live. Maybe I can get a sponsorship from them. But the other thing we need to talk about is moral leadership. Moral leadership. What do you stand for? What's your wrath conviction of who you are? What are your values? And even if you're working for a company that is missing the core values, you ought to have your own core values. That's not just a corporate thing. That's a me thing. And what are your core values? Have you identified your own personal core values? What is your moral stance on leadership? Where are your lines that you've drawn for what that you believe in, that you're convicted to? Have you not defined that? And most, I'm telling you, there's no guilt in that. Most leaders, most managers have not taken the time to think about that and write it down and think about what your moral compass is. And without that, you're going to be adrift in a big sea of opportunity to screw yourself up. And John, I know you've got a deep conviction around this too, because again, we've all worked for companies that had it. I've worked for a lot of companies that didn't. I've worked for a lot of bosses that absolutely did not have it. And I worked for some bosses that, man, I knew exactly where to go with something because he helped me or she helped me with my moral compass. What are your thoughts on that?
I think going back to the whole thing about not being yourself and not being authentic is people can see right through you when you make every decision in a vacuum. If every single decision is taken out of context and made in that manner, there's going to be no continuity, and people are going to see the inconsistency in your approach. It's going to probably end up being just the decisions won't be on par, whether it's regarding people or customers. And people will see that there's nothing really of value nothing that you value from a personal perspective. Now, I was fortunate to work for a number of folks that really were very, I want to say, even keel. They were firm but fair, but you always knew where you stood. If you screwed up, you knew it was going to happen. But it was the same for me as it would have been for Eric or anyone else working for us. As well as there were corporations, like we worked for PVH Corp, and PVH had this set of core values that I remember it came out, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years ago. And at the time I was kind of apprehensive because it was articulated, and I said to myself that, you know what, this will be good as long as sales are good and as long as profits are good. But as soon as they go away, just trust me, this stuff's going to be forgotten about. Guess what? It never went away. Okay. No. And in all the decisions that were made came from the prism of these core values. And I'll tell you what, they were individuality, partnership, passion, which is so important in the world, integrity, and accountability. So you can look at those things and say that each one of those in and of themselves, you'd have to agree with this as a business owner or an employee of a company. But when you wrap them all together, it really makes for a strong message and a strong foundation to build a culture off of. So I was really proud to work with that company. And I think Eric and I think we actually, didn't we do a little rap song on that one time? Okay.
We did.
We won't try a rendition of it.
I will tell you one line.
That's a guilty pleasure. I don't want to.
I'll tell you. I'll tell you one line that John really loved was this word: action.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
it was a
and
classic.
yet I encourage every employer to have a set of values, having a core value statement.
Yeah.
And for you linear thinkers out there, here's how you repurpose those core values. And Eric and I have done this with a recent client is we came up with the core values. And by the way, those core values were built around who we want to work with, both as customers and employees, how we want to represent ourselves to our customers and to our employees, who we want to be as a leader to our customers and our employees. What's the picture we want to portray? We converted that into interview questions, behavior-based interview questions. We turned that into their monthly review form. So everybody is being hired under those core values. We're measuring their personal core values against the company's core values. Is that a good match for the organization? The leader will understand whether they're a good match for that leader. And then we're holding people accountable to those core values on a monthly basis, how they behaved against those, which, by the way, core values very often affect your results or your outcome or your ability to achieve your goals as a manager or leader within the organization. You hold people accountable. It's a big, beautiful circle that's all connected, and it goes to the key point. I know what's expected of me. And again, back to John's point, I thought it was such a brilliant point, John, is when you have that as a leader, those core values that everybody understands firmly, that this is what my boss stands for. There's no ambiguity about how you're going to react to things. They know exactly what's expected of them. They know exactly what compass to follow in order to make a tough decision. We have to make a lot of tough decisions. And it gets harder as you move up the corporate ladder, right? You got to make a lot of tough decisions. And if you have those core values of which to make your decisions around, to be able to judge yourself against, to compare yourself to others, that's another key learning for you in your developmental challenges moving forward. And it's just a great menu to work off of. And again, employers, business owners, please come up with it. Reach out to one of us. We'll take you through the exercise to get your core values. It's a hard exercise, but it's worth every minute of it. And I can tell you, every employer that's worked with me in this practice has got them, and they love them, and they use them a lot. It's a great tool. And if you're leaving yourself out of that, you're missing a big opportunity. But even if it's not your employer, you're a manager or leader within an organization, have them for yourself so your people know what you stand for, who you are. All this is tied together. And Eric, you're busting to say something.
Yeah, I just think because we've been playing with this and we played with it in previous cycles of different companies throughout. And you're building your competencies, right? Your core values, your competencies. And it really creates a language from everyone to speak about and through, right? And that in turn brings your culture and it becomes who you are. Now, obviously, as the leader, if you're the CEO or the leader of a department, you have to believe in it and you have to speak to it, or it will become as zero can be, because 50% of zero is zero, 100% is zero. You have to believe that piece. And I think I just wanted to comment on that. And as an individual basis, we all have our things as we grow and we experience life. Do the right thing. That sounds, from Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing to, us having conversations about do the right thing. And always in my mind is always every year, I used to take about a day when we used to write our reviews that took a month to write, but I'd take one thing and I always say, okay, what's my my goal is always about continuous improvement for this year. What am I going to work on for me? So I'd always pick one thing and say, what's my continuous improvement? And that's an inner monologue kind of piece that I always use. And I still do it to this day in January.
It's a great habit to have built, and that's very impressive. But again, it's back to your point. It's one thing to come up with, and you got to talk about them as a leader.
Mhm.
And that's one of the reasons why we build it in to not only the corporate guideline, but the interview and the reviews. So it's always being talked about. Again, that's the brilliance of how this approach works for you, is if you utilize it using all the right tools the right way, it's always talked about. You don't have to have a town hall and talk about it. You get to live it every day. And everybody working for you is being reviewed against it every month. And everybody that's being hired is being hired under the guidelines of that. In the interest of time, we've got about 10 minutes before we have to wrap this thing up. There's one other thing I want to dig into, and I think it's probably one of these are all important. This is one that I see a lot of managers struggle with, which is blended processing. Be able to make decisions in a way that takes on other people's opinions, involving others, realizing that you don't have all the information. And John, I know you're very passionate about this topic. Share some of your thoughts on that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Bob?
The blended
You clipped us.
processing, the blended processing, how to use people outside of just yourself to come up with the answers for yourself.
Yeah, I think if you want to, again, to be authentic, you want to be able to include other opinions. And if you're not, I'll give you an example. If you're always the smartest guy in the room, if you know it all, okay, you're never going to let anybody onto the fact that you might not be the subject matter expert in this one particular area, and you're not going to go out and look for other ideas. So therefore, you're not going to include those ideas. You're never going to get better. So if you truly want to learn and grow as a leader, you're going to need to be a little bit vulnerable. You're going to need to go out there and ask for opinions. And it might not be always from somebody from another department. It might be from somebody who works for you. And again, that's when you really need to be vulnerable and say, hey, you know what? I can learn something from my people because you're better. Maybe you're better at recruiting than me, or you're better at creating a PowerPoint, or you're better with technology. That's how we all grow and continue to get better. You're going to be okay. You'll be okay. And you might be even good as a leader if you don't include people and you don't look for those other opinions. But the only way you're going to be great is if you involve other people. And the only way to involve them is to be authentic. And again, let your guard down, let your game face down, let your guard down and your shield, and open up, because that's how you get other ideas into the process. That's how you get those great ideas and the synergy going.
Right. And also, when you're inclusive with all sorts of folks and diverse, I think there's a piece there that, or even in industries, I myself, either construction or manufacturing or restaurants, the problems are eerily the same. That's the fact is, it's almost the same. It's about people, right? It's what it's about. And every business is what, Vaughn? It's in the people business.
I didn't realize I was going to get a pop quiz. I wasn't quick on the draw.
I thought I'd throw it out to you that way. But the pure fact is this: when you have conversations with other folks in industries, you might find some other ideas as well, but it usually comes down to people. So.
It does. And that's generally one of the biggest struggles. It's not generally. It is the biggest struggle. Anybody moving from manager to leader, if you can't get the people part of it down, the empathy, the soft skills, the way to handle different situations with different people, using the right hand, using their disc profile, your disc profile. If you don't have the system down, the process down, and have practiced it, you're going to run into some walls. And it's, if you don't know something, that's okay. We've talked about that a lot today. And in fact, I'll tell you another personal story. I've done this a lot. I've done this a lot in my career. Been willing to, and I've learned a lot from it. I remember when, as part of my training with CarMax, I had to spend 6 months as a sales manager, and I was in the Tampa, Florida store. And I'm in Tampa, Florida, did okay. They were just average, sometimes below average in the way of sales and volume, but everything in that organization, from a sales standpoint, not only the number of units that you sold, cars that you sold, but is your close rate. How many people came in the door? How many went out with a car? And Tampa was notorious for a very low close rate. Now, there was several reasons for that. There was some credit challenges. But that in itself shouldn't have been the problem. My common sense was telling me that shouldn't be the problem, because we can approve anybody. But it was really how many cars took a test drive and how many submitted a credit app. And it's that credit app, which is that first step to sell a car at the test drive, right? And there was a store an hour and a half away in Orlando. And I eventually went over and was the general manager for Orlando, as it turns out. But I'm looking at the numbers every day, and I look at our numbers, and Orlando saw 100 customers, Tampa saw 100 customers. Orlando sold 20 cars, we sold 8 cars. So we had an 8% close rate, they had a 20% close rate. But the big differentiator, the behavior that was glorified in the way of a difference, was the number of credit apps. And I was like, how does Orlando's sales team send so many more credit apps? And if I called a sales manager over there, they couldn't really tell me that it just happened, right? And I went to the general manager of the Tampa store and I said, you're going to have to give me a day. I'm driving to Orlando and I want to go to observe that sales team, those sales managers, find out what I can borrow from those sales managers. I can come back and teach our sales team to improve that aspect of their sales process. So I went over, I spent a day. It was hard to unpack because it was just how they did business, but I picked enough brains during the course of the day to teach myself so I could go back and teach others. And that information I brought back was valuable to a lot of people. They adopted it, the salespeople. Other sales managers adopted it, and we slowly watched Tampa's close rate go up because they were putting enough credit apps in. All of a sudden, we found out what the barrier was to submitting credit apps, or it was just a missing technique was all it was. It was fairly simple. But had I not been willing to go friggin' find out what Tampa or Orlando was doing versus what we were doing, it was cars are cars, customers are customers. What was the difference? And I was more than willing to say, I don't know. I don't have the answers. Let me go to the person who does have the answers, because they're smoking everybody through doing that. And so just as an example, and you may, as a manager within your organization, see another team that's outperforming you. Well, there's a reason for that. Or you may be the top performer. Well, there's a reason for that. But do you know why? Can you teach that to somebody else? And very often, bringing it back to the point, is you as the leader, or that leader that you're trying to aspire to, has some behaviors. They have some approaches that their people are bought into things, that they want to make you look better. They want to make you look successful. They're willing to go do the work in order to achieve the mission. It comes from you and their respect for you, that leadership that you portray to them. And if they don't have the proper level of respect, and you're not vulnerable enough to figure out why certain things aren't performing at the level they should be, and willing to go get the information or go ask for the advice, or at least, Eric said it earlier, very often the people working for you have the doggone answer, but you've never asked them, so you've never gotten it from them. And it's okay to say, I don't know. But it's more important that every time you're making a decision, as often as you can to make a decision, I got to watch how I say that because people think I'm crazy, is very often if you include at least another person or 2 or 3 people into making decisions, we used to call that partnering at CarMax, partner on your decisions. You learn something. You get a better decision out of it. You keep yourself out of trouble. You get different perspectives on it. It's getting information from others as a leader makes you more effective. And it could be from your boss, it could be from a peer, it could be from a direct report, it could be from a competitor. When I started this business, I started looking at all the competition. How do they do it? And I needed to understand how to fashion this business in a positioning, a marketing positioning way that was going to be different, but there was parts that I had to borrow from other people. And because they did that really well. So it's, no matter what position you're in, you've got to be able to take advice, be willing to take advice, ask for advice, get input, get multiple data points. And back to Eric's first point, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You just don't. You just need to be the best leader in the room. You don't have to be
authentic while you're doing it.
I think you're right, Paul. There's not a lot of new ideas out there. It's just being smart enough to listen to some of the ones that are working. And what was the thing that we always talked about is it's kind of like this might be X-rated now, but you go to a bar and you hear a good line. Guess what? If it worked, you pick it up and make it your own. So it's not like there's a lot of new stuff out there and a lot of new ways to sell cars, but understanding what the ones that truly work are in which situations. I think that's what smart leaders do. They put their ear to the railroad track and they hear the train coming, but they listen for those things. And I think that's the difference.
Yeah. And if you keep yourself isolated, in fact, I just put a manager through this exercise a few weeks ago in the aerospace industry, working on the production line. And it was one team, because as anybody might know, in manufacturing, production numbers, KPIs, one of those is your efficiency. And it was one team that was far more efficient than this manager's team. But this manager lived in isolation. They weren't willing to look outside of their little team or themselves to figure out why. But they had plenty of excuses. They were full of excuses, just not solutions, right? And finally, I forced this manager, and it was painful, to go watch another team operate for a day. I mean, you just have to stand there and watch and observe. And I said, I bet you can figure it out in an hour, but I want you to commit a day to it. And it took a little more than an hour, but this person was making notes and observations and being really honest with herself, got outside of her isolated cone to go see how a better team does it, how a better leader was leading that team, made some notes, came back, applied some of those methods that she observed with another team, and son of a gun. Oof. If productivity didn't improve, if efficiency didn't improve. And it's like slapping your head. Why didn't I think about that before? Was because we don't, right? We're protecting ourselves. We don't want to admit, and again, back to the mirror, we don't want to admit that we don't know everything. But man, you get down in the dirt and humble yourself and go see how somebody else does it. You're bound to learn something.
Right.
Bound to learn something. So put yourself in that position. Don't live in isolation as a leader. So we're going to wrap this thing up, gentlemen. Again, I love talking to you guys. I love that we get paid for doing what we do. And you guys are awesome. You listeners are awesome. Thank you for all your loyalty. Keep up the great work out there. 2 big offers from today. Free disc profile, take advantage of it in the show notes, and sign up for those office hours. Take advantage of that. You'll learn something. Get out of your isolation, go expose yourself to some knowledge, and rock your future. I promise you'll learn a lot from it. So sign up for the office hours. We'll send you the schedule. You'll find a time and a day that works for you, and go learn some stuff. Thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you all next week.